ABC News Network News, where he won an Emmy, a Peabody, and a DuPont Award. Let's give it up. Please welcome Miguel Parga.
Thank you, John. Thank you. That's quite an introduction. Yes, those things are true. I started my career as a journalist. I worked for ABC News for about 10 years. It was a very interesting decade in news that I happened to cover back when Peter Jennings was still doing the news. May he rest in peace. And during that time, I did win an Emmy, a Peabody, and a DuPont Award. After that, I moved to LA, where I wrote screenplays and commercials for companies like Verizon and Miller Lite, and Pepsi, and all these places. And I was a script doctor for many, many years. After that, I moved back to New York, where I started teaching at the New York Film Academy. Last week, actually, was my anniversary at the New York Film Academy. I've been teaching there now 14 years. I know, it kind of goes kind of quickly. And I have actually directed 21 films. I think that it's a little dated. But anyway, listen, I wanted to come on and talk to you about a little bit about what makes films work, why they work. How come sometimes we go see a movie and the 2 hours go by like this, and other times we sit through a 5-minute short and it's the 5 longest minutes of your life. After 14 years of teaching students how to make movies, one of the things that I would love to talk about is the mistakes that my students keep making over and over again. Not to say that you as filmmakers have made those mistakes, but as I talk through some of these principles and some of these mistakes, maybe you can see some echoes in your own work, and you can, next time you do this, you do it better. Okay? The one thing that I tell my students is that in film, there's always another film that you can make. You're never perfect when you do something, right? There's too many moving parts. And part of this is every time you do it, you learn. I had a really good friend in New York who told me every film that you make, the thing you needed to know to make it, you learn after you're done. Right? And now you have to go back and actually apply that to the next film that you're shooting. It's a thing that has many moving parts. So let's talk a little bit about some of the principles of what make storytelling in film and television work. I'll tell you about some of the mistakes that my students make. I'll try not to talk too much. I'll talk for about maybe 25 minutes, and then I'll open it up to questions. Okay, and hopefully plenty of those, and we can talk about movies as long as you want. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to say is this. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but movies, just like plays, are divided into acts. Okay? And the structure of film, when you're talking about a feature-length film, is a 3-act structure. This is something that most everybody knows. Okay? Now, here's a question, and I'm looking for the simple answer. Why 3 acts? A hero's journey. A hero's journey. Opening, middle, and close. Beginning, middle, and an end. Okay, and this is something that seems so clear, so obvious, that we don't really think about it. But what I want to ask you to do is stop for a second and think about why that is. Beginning, middle, and an end. This is not something that somebody invented, you realize. This is the way that human beings tell stories. We have a linear mind, and we organize things in a linear way. If I asked you to tell me the dream you had last night, and that dream maybe was just images, random images, right? You're still, when you're telling it to me, you're going to try and organize it with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Because instinctively, you know, I'm going to understand it better if you tell it to me that way, okay? This is connected and attached to our DNA, guys. I want you to think about this. Look, when human beings were struggling during evolution, we're still struggling during evolution, right? And we're going back now millions of years, and we're competing with other animals in the wild, okay? Those animals had advantages over us. They had claws, they had strength, they had speed. We didn't have any of that. What we had was a brain. How does the brain work? brain absorbs information. Okay? And what was the first method to give us information? Storytelling. A man would get up, a man or a woman would get up in the middle of the cave by the fire while everybody sat in the dark, and they would tell a story. And that story, the people that heard it could travel and tell it somewhere else. And the knowledge would travel with them. I mean, think about it. What an incredible tool. The human beings who were able to absorb this way of communicating were the ones who survived, who were able to learn and to adapt from that. Okay? So, movies, television shows, web series are told beginning, middle, and an end. So one of the things that I tell my students a lot of the times is, look, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel already works. Okay? Now, some students, their mind is, I need to do it different. And I say, yes. In order to stand out, you need to be what I call a disruptor. Right? You need to do something different from everybody else. However, don't reinvent the wheel. Just change what the wheel carries. Okay? And take that information and make it yours. Use the tools that are at your disposal. Okay, so we're talking about 3-act structure. Here's another one of the things that my students do quite a bit that it surprises me, because one of the main principles of filmmaking is that they start their movies without a good inciting incident. So let me tell you what an inciting incident is. It's the scene in the show or in the movie, okay, that starts my story. Okay? And here's one of the little secrets about filmmaking that I love to teach my students. A good inciting incident has a good dilemma to it. Now, who can tell me what a dilemma is?
It could be a judgment that you have to make. Right or wrong, good or evil.
Right or wrong, good or evil. Very good. It's a problem. Right? How many options do you have in a dilemma? Listen to the word dilemma. How many options? 2 options. But here's the tricky thing about it. An option between a good choice and a bad choice, that's not a dilemma. A dilemma is only a dilemma when it's a choice between bad and bad. Okay? And this is key when you're starting a show. It's a choice between bad and bad. When Walter White, they tell him that he's got cancer and he can't afford to pay for his medical bills and his family is going to go bankrupt, he has 2 choices. Die bankrupt or sell drugs to survive, right? It's a choice between bad and bad. When the sheriff in Jaws, they tell him that there's a shark out, he has 2 options. 1, ignore the shark, which he tries, not good. 2, go out and hunt down the shark. Not good either. He'd rather stay home and watch TV, but we can't give him that choice. You cannot give him that choice. So many bad things in filmmaking happen. For example, this is especially true in horror genre, which is one of my favorite genres. I make a lot of horror movies. Is that the filmmaker will force the protagonist to make a bad choice because they need the story to continue. So here we meet this girl, and she's in her house, and she hears scary noises in the attic, and she decides to do what? Go check them out. No. Okay, impossible. Nobody in their right mind would do that, right? You have to make it so that it is a dilemma. So, same situation. I'm a girl, she's in her house, she hears scary noises in the attic, but wait, her baby's up there. So now she's got 2 choices. Ignore the noises, let the baby die, or go up there and find out what's going on. Okay? So, dilemma on the inciting incident is one of the biggest mistakes that my students make. Okay? Here's another one. They'll show me a movie, and it's a movie in which the protagonist is passive. In other words, the protagonist is just sitting there waiting for things to happen to them. Not good. Okay? So one of the things that you want is to have an active protagonist, right? We want to know as the audience, what does the protagonist want? And what's going to happen if they don't get it? Okay? Every scene that you write as part of your series, as part of your movie, you have to answer these questions. Question number 1, who wants what? Question number 2, why now? And question number 3, what happens if they don't get it? And you have to have a compelling answer for all of those questions. Okay? So, back to the 3-act structure. 3 acts. Everything in cinema, everything in movies, everything in storytelling, actually, happens through conflict. This is one of the things that I tell my students that I enjoy telling them the most. I say, your job as a filmmaker is to make the life of your protagonist hell. You're going to throw as many problems as you can their way. Now, why is it so good in movies to watch somebody struggle? Why? Why do you think? Because it makes you feel better about your own struggles, because it's more interesting. But here's the real reason, guys. And this is something that a lot of people don't know. There's an emotion that is required for the audience to feel when they're watching a movie. They must feel this emotion towards the protagonist. And the emotion is empathy. Who can tell me the difference between empathy and sympathy? Yes?
Empathy is when you feel.
Very good. You identify with what they're feeling, right? You put themselves in their shoes. Sympathy is whether you like them or not, or you feel bad or not. That's not necessarily that strong. Empathy is an emotion that's much stronger than sympathy. Actually, empathy is an emotion that we can feel towards somebody that we do not like. This, in movies, is called the circle of good. And we draw the circle of good around the protagonist. We make the audience empathize towards the protagonist, even when the protagonist, objectively speaking, is a terrible person. Think about Tony Soprano. Think about the lead, Michael Corleone, in The Godfather, right? Even think about Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. We still feel empathy towards Hannibal Lecter. It's amazing. Sometimes people are shaking their heads. Well, I know I don't. But the truth is that a lot of people do. At the end of the movie, when Hannibal Lecter says to Clarice, I'm having an old friend for dinner, and we know that what he means is going to go kill the doctor that has been taking care of him, we're going like, yeah, I don't like that doctor. Even though the other doctor never killed anybody. Right? We still feel empathy for Hannibal Lecter. So empathy is one of the things that we want to create towards the protagonist. One of the first tools that we have for creating empathy is making their life difficult. Why? Because we all think that our lives are difficult. We all think that the universe conspires against us, and as we see the protagonist struggling with whatever it is that they're having to struggle, we go like, oh, I understand what that feels like. And that's exactly what I want as a filmmaker. Okay? In the 3-act structure, especially on a feature-length motion picture, or even in a show it works in a longer scale because we're talking about seasons now, and we're talking about the end of the show. The change that the protagonist goes through must be irreversible. This is very important, guys. The change that the protagonist goes through must be irreversible. What that means is this. The person that starts the show, after they go through whatever it is that they have to go through in the movie, at the end, they cannot be the same person that started the show. And by the way, in the movies or in television shows, death doesn't count as irreversible, because death is reversible in movies. Right? How many times have you seen somebody die and they come back? At the end of Avengers Infinity War, half the Avengers were dead. And what happened in the next movie? They all come back. It's a movie. Right? In the second act, climax of E.T., E.T. dies. And then he comes back to life. Does anybody know how he comes back to life and why? No. You know why? Because it doesn't matter. It's a movie. Okay? And if you're Steven Spielberg, you're like, you know what? I'm bringing E.T. back. Fine. Perfect. Bring him back. Nobody's going to ask any questions. Nobody's going to go, wait a minute. He was dead 20 minutes ago, and now he's alive. It doesn't matter. Okay? I bring him back. But if you take the same example, guys, Elliot, who's the protagonist of E.T., at the end of the movie, he is changed forever. He cannot go back to being the same child at the beginning of the film. He's grown up. You understand? This is what gives us that satisfaction at the end of the film that we go like, wow, I went through something. I felt the change that this person went through. Think about this. Filmmakers are able to achieve this in 2 hours. That's impressive. 2 hours I have to convince you that the events of this movie have changed the life of that person forever. Another great example that I love to use with my students is the example of Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. Think about Frodo at the beginning of the first film and Frodo at the end of the last film. It's not even the same person, right? This idea of irreversible change is one of the things that most movies miss with. And a lot of the times when you go to a movie and you're sitting there and the movie ends and you go like, I don't know, something didn't quite click on me. It's because that change never really happened. You didn't get the full experience of evolving with the character. Okay? Here's another one of the things that's part of regular structure of movies. At the end of the movie, so each act has a climax, right? Just like they have in theater. It's very high dramatic scene. So the most dramatic scene in the whole movie is the climax of Act 3. Okay? That would be the scene with the most change towards the end. Okay? There are scenes after the climax of Act 3. They're called resolution scenes. Now, here's the question. Why, after the climax of Act 3, why do I need scenes? Why not finish the movie at the climax? Okay? To clear confusion. Excellent. Because listen, when we go to the movies and the filmmaker raises a question, we want an answer to that question. You cannot, for example, raise up a question somewhere during Act 2 and then not answer it by the end of the movie. I want to know what happened. Okay? The other reason for it is this. It's what's called in the theater a slow curtain. Okay? You can't end the movie at the climax of Act 3, which is the most dramatic of the scenes, and then suddenly turn the lights on and send everybody home. I mean, think about Titanic, right? And she's floating in that thing, that piece of wood, and he's in the water. Never mind that he could have gotten on with her, but I'm not going to say it. Okay? So he's floating there and he dies, and she says, I'll never let you go. And she lets him go and he freezes to death, and then suddenly, boom, lights on, roll credits, go home. No. One, I need resolution. I need to answer questions. Right? What happened to the rock that she was wearing? That's the first thing that we wanted to know in the movie, right? That they're searching for the rock. What's going to happen to the old lady? Right? Those are all answers that the filmmaker is giving you. Actually, the filmmaker goes even beyond that. He tells you what happens after death. He says she's the last person to die who was on Titanic, and what happens to her after she dies? She goes down to Titanic, and everybody's there wearing their tuxes. And she enters the ballroom, and the man that she fell in love with is waiting for her. Right? The filmmaker is giving you an answer that you want to hear. Okay, guys? And here's another big thing that I tell my students that they should realize is that we are members of a service industry. Okay? Why do we go to the movies? Why do we go for many reasons? We go to be entertained, we go to laugh, we go to do all these things. But one of the main reasons is that we go to the movies to experience things we do not experience in our own lives. Because for 2 hours, the lights go down and you are James Bond. And it feels fantastic. And there's none of the danger and none of the other stuff associated with a life like that. And then the lights turn on and you go back to your life having had that communion with the art form. That's one of the reasons, by the way, guys, the lights are turned off to give you privacy so you can have that expression. Right? With the show that you're watching. How many times have you been at home watching a show with somebody and you want to cry, but you won't cry because the person is next to you and you feel a little embarrassed to be moved by what's going on the screen? That happens all the time, right? Because you want privacy. You want to have that communion, that sense of, I understand what's going on. Okay? Here's another big principle of filmmaking that applies to web series, series on TV, films, short films. Look, when you're writing a screenplay, it's almost like you're building a puzzle, okay? Every piece that goes in there needs to do something to the story. It doesn't really work when you have scenes that are extra scenes that do not move the story forward, okay? So in classical design, which is maybe 90% of the stories that you see on television and you see in movies, there are two ways to move the story forward, okay? Only two ways. It's kind of odd, but every scene must have this moment. This moment is called the turning point, okay? And there are two kinds of turning points. Turning point number one, it's called action decision. In other words, the character makes a choice, right? A classic action decision scene is if you take the blue pill, you stay in the Matrix. If you take the red pill, you get out of the Matrix. And Neo makes a choice. And the story can move forward. Now, let me let you in on a little secret about that type of turning point. Because once I tell you this, and if you understand it, if you grasp it, if you use it, you'll be miles ahead of anybody writing screenplays right now. Okay? Listen. Character makes a choice. They have an expectation of what's going to happen when they make that choice. That expectation must never happen. Okay? Character makes a choice. They have an expectation, and you must deny them that expectation. What happens then? You force them to do what? Make another choice, getting deeper into trouble and deeper into the plot. It's a little mechanism that moves the story forward. If you learn that, already you'll be like miles ahead, okay, of how to move things forward. It keeps the audience interested. So that's one type of turning point. The second type of turning point is called revelation. And all it is that I introduce a piece of information, changing the circumstances. Okay? So that's the other way to move the story forward. A classic revelation scene is, Luke, I am your father. Right? Or if you're fans of the CSI franchise of shows, there's a revelation turning point every other scene. Right? They find a clue and they learn something new, and the circumstances change. Okay, guys? These are just little pieces in the puzzle of telling stories, guys. And the thing that I love to teach my students and make them understand is this. Look, this is something that comes to us from antiquity. This is something that you can use for your own purpose of making movies or making series or making whatever it is that you want to make. Use the wheel. Do not reinvent it. There's no need to reinvent it. Okay? All right. I think that's good enough information for now. What I want to do is open it up to questions. Anything having to do with the structure of movies or anything having to do with storytelling as it pertains to filmmaking, I'm more than happy to answer questions about that. Yes?
Do you have any good examples of comedy films or television shows? Any examples of comedy film or television shows that really hit these points?
Absolutely. If it's a good comedy, it hits all of the points. Superbad, excellent comedy that hits all those points. Actually, Superbad, somebody mentioned the hero's journey. Superbad is exactly the hero's journey, point by point. Okay, it's the same thing that Odysseus went through. Okay, in the Odyssey, it's the same thing except that it's in comedy format. Okay. Bridesmaids is another great example of that. In The Office, many of the episodes follow these rules. I don't want to call it rules, guys. They're really principles. And that's the beauty of it, is that the principle you can apply almost to any format that you want. Now, a few things about comedy that you should know. Comedy is hard. Okay? The reason being, and why I tell my students a lot of times it's harder than doing drama, is because there's no question whether it works or not. Right? The answer is in the audience. If they laugh, it worked. If they don't laugh, it doesn't work. And here's another thing that sometimes is difficult for filmmakers to swallow. It is. It's not that your family laughs and your friends laugh and the people in your classroom laugh. No. Strangers have to laugh. People that are paying for it have to laugh. Okay, it's a very different proposition than when you watch the film and you're with your class and everybody in your class wants to be supportive, and they go like, yes, okay. And here's the one thing about comedy that's really interesting, and it is this. It's one of the oldest principles about comedy, and it's this: is that there's a contract that you make with the audience, which is this: nobody in this movie will get hurt. Okay, it doesn't matter what happens. Okay, buildings may fall on them. All right, and the Blues Brothers get up, dust themselves off, and then go on to the next scene. Okay, it's just comedy, right? And we're trying to like keep it at a light level, right? So I hope that answers your question. Yes, sir.
Hi. I had a question about you're talking about the irreversible change.
Yes.
Similar to comedy, when it comes to like a sitcom, there's kind of like a revelation of the character changes, but then at the start of the next episode, everything's back to normal. I wonder if you had some thoughts on that.
Excellent question. So for many years, television shows had that format. You would go through a show, the show would have a beginning, middle, and end, and the characters would not change. And the reason for that is that when you tuned in next week, people wanted to see the same character. They didn't want to see somebody that changed. Okay. There was many shows started the trend of changes over the course of a season. So, for example, a show like The X-Files, which was kind of an in-between show, the characters did evolve through the many seasons. X-Files, I think, had 10 years, 10 seasons. Right? So, if you look at the relationship between Scully and Mulder, it changes through the years. But the changes were minor. Again, because it was common wisdom that people would want to see the same characters over and over again. Now, the show that changed everything was The Sopranos. Okay? The Sopranos is not the type of show which you tune in to watch the same thing over and over again. Tony Soprano changes. He changes at the end of season 1, he changes at the end of season 2, he changes at the end of the show. The only difference between a feature film, for example, and a television show is that the scale of the change is slower in the show. You have time to do that. Now, sitcoms. Let's talk about sitcoms because they have a little bit of a different format. So sitcoms are not written in 3-act structures. They're written in 2 acts. Okay? Yeah, they happen pretty quick. Okay? A little problem is introduced. There's some kind of planning on how to solve it, and then there's a resolution. And every episode is the same. And again, they come to us from the old school, characters must not change. But even in the world of sitcoms, when you look at revolutionary shows like The Office, like Seinfeld, right? Seinfeld was a show that changed a lot of things. When you look at New Girl,